Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here. I am on vacation this week with my family, so uploads are a little bit weirder this time. And once again, while I got my family out with everything that we needed to go on vacation, I forgot my microphone. So I do apologize, especially on such an interesting topic that I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions on and thus are more likely to watch, which is one talking about heavy mortars. And so, as you know, we did medium mortars last week. We're maybe looking at heavy mortars this week to kind of help to close up a bunch of the heavy weapons platoon options that you have available to you. And so now I feel like we're in a comfortable place where we can get ready to talk about that platoon, which is awesome because it's one of my favorites. So to take a look at this, we are going to be looking at the stuff that we typically look at. We're going to look at their range and rate of fire, opportunity costs, pins and damage. We'll look at their ability to take and hold objectives, what kinds of things you should be targeting with these in an ideal world. And we're also going to tack on at the end something that we haven't done in any of the other mortar videos, which is to take a look at medium versus heavy mortars because they're not the same. And like they're kind of the same. They can fill similar roles, but there are some things where you look at it and you say, yeah, you're wasting potential by going with either of these against specific targets, and they are different. And so to help to not settle the debate between which is better, medium versus heavy, because there are a lot of factors that are going to go into that, we're at least going to give you an idea of, well, depending on what you think you're likely to face or what you're most afraid of, the things that your army might have the most trouble with, can at least give you an idea of, is it worth spending those extra points to go all the way up to heavy, or can you save yourself some points by staying in medium? So to start off with, range and rate of fire has not changed since last edition, which is always nice for people who are coming back over. We still got that minimum range of 12 inches, maximum range of 72. And as a quick reminder, as we talked about in the medium mortar video, since range is measured closest model to closest model, that means be careful, because if a conga line of guys that would, most of them are within that normal standard range of yours, you will still miss automatically as long as the closest guy is within that 12-inch range of yours. Now, thankfully, that's relatively easy to avoid. Worst case scenario, since you're taking these guys in heavy weapons platoons, you take a machine gun or two in order to help protect your mortars, and you put those guys like, call it 6 inches or so ahead of them, maybe a little more than 6 inches ahead of them, just in case people are bringing rocket launchers. And those guys will ideally keep people from trying to get within 12 inches of the mortar because they would be within point blank range of a machine gun. And ask anybody from World War II or World War I for that matter, that's not very fun to be in. And so the nice thing about that long range of 72 inches is not that you can reach to the same range as like a heavy AT gun or something else like that. It's really just that you don't have to think about maximum range, because to be completely honest, the overwhelming majority of games, you are not going to use your entire 72-inch range, either because you aren't going to have line of sight to that place, spotter included, or just because of where you're placed. There's literally no place on the board that's beyond 72 inches of you, because if you place yourself closer to the center instead of way over in a corner, there is actually a really good chance that nothing is going to be more than 6 feet away. And so because of that, it's nice to have in the back of your mind to just be like, if I can see them and they're not within 12 inches of me, I can hit them. Now the question is just whether or not I succeed on the rolling to hit. And that's the next part about it, is that the one attack is indirect fire only. Okay, and that's an important consideration, just like with the medium mortar and like the light mortar. You have to do the ranging in mechanic, right? So the first turn you're trying to hit on sixes. The next turn, if you declare a fire order and they have not moved beyond 3 inches of where they were, more on that a little bit later when we talk about objective taking and objective holding, then it is very possible that now you're going to be hitting on fives. Okay, there are technically some other situations and stuff like that that might matter, like if they killed your spotter and have to use a new spotter in order to try to do stuff where it might not be on fives, but now you're looking for a 5 or a 6. And then if you don't hit that round, and again, same situation stay, now you're hitting on a 4, 5, or 6, and so on and so forth until eventually you're hitting on 2s. There is no auto hit on 1s, although to be honest, that'd be 6 rounds into the game where you haven't hit anything, at which point, I mean, I'm going to be honest, if I'm winning the game and you have had that bad of luck with your mortar by that point, I might just say, dude, just take the hit. It's the last turn of the game. I don't need us to fight this. Okay. And so but technically speaking, ones always fail, right? So the lowest you can get is a 2+, but as soon as you do hit with that, the guys lock in those coordinates, and now you're hitting on a 2+ all the time, as long as, again, you don't lose the spotter, you don't move yourself, they don't move beyond 3 inches of where they were, etc. Okay. It is comparable to a medium howitzer in that you're getting that pen +3, you're getting that 72-inch standard range sort of thing going on. It does have a shorter minimum range, which is quite nice, and why I think a lot of people prefer, if they want to do larger high explosive template damage, they prefer heavy mortars to larger levels of howitzers. The trade-off, though, is howitzers can always just choose to stop ranging in and go direct, or even not even go indirect fire the entire game if they don't want to. And they can instead just be firing with direct fire. That is um, sometimes something that mortars would really love to be able to do because there are times where you're like, man, these people are just moving around, or they're using transports to ferry up infantry that are going to be problematic, and mortars are going to have a lot of trouble with that. More on that when we look at opportunity cost. Okay, but what it does mean is that it's an interesting trade-off, right? I mean, I do think maybe howitzers got nerfed a little too hard this edition in the hopes that people would take things like AT guns and autocannons. And I think those things got too much of a bump, and the nerf to the howitzer was just a little too high. But suffice it to say, heavy mortar avoids some of those problems by just being a little bit cheaper, right? It is still highly effective. It's highly efficient for a lot of the stuff that it's designed to do, and that's why it gets a good rating from me. The only trade-off is that it has the one weakness, which is people rushing it, which is perfectly fine to have in a game. It does also have the fixed special rule, so it can only fire to the front 90-degree arc, 45 degrees to one side of the tube, I guess, and then 45 degrees to the other side of the tube. You do use your advance to pivot, and then you run as part of a move action, which is perfectly fine. Okay, again, and it's not like you get the shorter move like you get with artillery pieces. It is still the full infantry move that you need to get. It is also worth noting, heavy mortars don't generally get a lot of the subtypes for other nations. And so because of that, do not expect, for example, to see a heavy mortar with the Rangers lead the way special, because they can't take it, right? They do get some of them for certain nations, but in general, a lot of the heavy mortars are missing subtypes. So just be aware of that. Look at the entry in your book to see whether or not you can get things like, for example, Fieldcraft from Gebersjäger. I don't think they can. Pretty sure that you get access to that, unlike your light mortars, possibly even your medium mortars, but I don't think they get that on the heavy mortar. So we'll take a look at that. And we'll see whether this changes with a group like Japan when that book jumps out, because that could be really spicy if you could get some really useful subtype special rules on your heavy mortars. And that's part of what they use to make Japan a very strong, defensible sort of army. But we'll see. In terms of opportunity cost, they're great because they're super cheap counter battery fire. If you take them for 42 points inexperienced, you take them 60 points regular. I would probably take them, if you're going to take them regular, I take them 70 points with a spotter, just that you have the option. And worst case scenario, it gives you some deployment advantages when it comes to deploying infiltrators. So toward that end, I think that's on its own really good. It is a really great answer against artillery. It will work perfectly well against fixed teams. It works pretty well against camping infantry and armor. We'll talk about those a little bit later, because I got a great question following the medium mortar video talking about the camping infantry side of things. We'll talk about that later when we talk about objective taking. Okay. But suffice it to say, anything that really would prefer not to take an advance order and would prefer to be doing a fire order or an ambush order or something else like that, and they're designed to provide fire down range, these things are fantastic, because you're forcing your opponent to either risk the mortar, which could be very bad, go down and risk the mortar, which is also really bad, or to move and be less efficient, at which point the opportunity cost that you have from this is actually getting a really good return on investment, because it's not that you're removing points worth of the enemy. That's one way to measure opportunity cost. It's not even so much that you're getting a certain amount of firepower or a tool for the amount of points you're paying for it. It's a combination of those two things being fine if you end up doing hits during the game, but also the way that you made your opponent's use of points less effective, which is excellent. Okay. The Pen +3 is also really good against light armor removal, right? I mean, this is, it's going to be +4 against top armor, because you're always hitting against top armor because it's indirect fire. That's going to be 4s to glance, a damage value 8 vehicle. It's going to be 3s to glance, a damage value 7 vehicle. And again, no cover save, which is also really nice, right? So unlike autocannons and AT guns and things like that, that might be really good at reaching out and touching people, there's no chance that when it comes to armor, it's going to bounce off of a building, right? Or something else like that. It's not going to destroy a tree instead of destroying the vehicle that was intended. It also makes it very reliable against infantry, because it doesn't matter whether they're inexperienced, regular, or veteran. It's going to be 2s to wound, no cover save. Even if somebody purchases the SN-42 body armor for the Soviets, which would normally make it so that effectively you're wounding them on 6s instead of wounding them on 5s, that is ignored by high explosive damage, which this is. So you are guaranteed, when you target an infantry unit, if you hit them, number of hits may vary, Number of wounds is going to be pretty reliable because it's going to be twos and there's no save, which is excellent. Okay. In addition, the 3 inch radius, like, you tell yourself it's only a 1.5 or 3 inch diameter. Okay. It's a 1.5 inch radius is really big. Okay. I mean, even if the opponent is really smart about how to space out your models, you're easily covering 3 to 6 models, depending on whether they're in one line or two, easily 3 to 6, could be as many as more than 9, depending on how you situate it, right? I mean, it could be as much as, I think close to 16 models. Like if they're really compacted and they're all like base to base with each other, you could clip about 16 models with this thing. Okay. There's a lot there. And so even if they were to go down, you'd have those, sure, but the half is still going to be a pretty decent number of people with, again, twos to wound, no save, which is not bad. Now, what are the downsides? First of all, it is a 4-man team, which is not as fragile as a lot of other team weapons, but it is still relatively fragile, right? I mean, you don't see a lot of people throwing 4-man spot pin units or something else like that for a durability mission. That's not their goal, right? They may be there to quickly take something, go down and hold until another unit comes by to help them out on an objective. But in general, you're going to find that these guys are a unit you're going to have to protect and maintain so that way they are not wiped off the board. Okay. They are also vulnerable to counter battery fire. There's a very good chance that your opponent's going to catch 2 to 3 of these guys in a single blast if they're shooting at you. And so enemy mortars, enemy howitzers, you can anticipate there will be substantial damage. If people can get machine gun teams firing on these guys, this could be very dangerous, especially if you cut corners and try to take an inexperienced team. Okay. In addition, if you take the spotter and you built your plan for survivability around using line of sight from the spotter instead of using line of sight from the mortar team itself, and thus opening itself up to being shot by other people, you could find that by losing the spotter when you were originally ranging it on 5s or 4s, now you got to either switch to another spotter or you got to move the team in order to get them more effective. Well, now you're resetting back to 6s, right? Either way. And so because of that, like there are gimmicks that the opponent can use to kind of tink away and remove some of the benefits of the spotter and the mortar team as a whole. And that's problematic. Okay, so you want to be careful of that. From a pin generating perspective, honestly, it's actually not very good. In second edition, you could reliably get about 4 pins max or so. Assuming 2 hits, you're rolling D3 pins, you're getting about 2 pins per time. You're looking at about 4 per game. Okay. Some are going to be higher, some are going to be lower. Okay. Which on average at 75 points regular was going to be between 19 and 75 points per pin, which is not great. It's not the worst we've seen so far in the series, but it is not particularly good. And in third edition, it's actually about the same because, again, the mechanics have not dramatically changed. Even the fact that you can use any spotter has not dramatically changed it because it resets every time you switch to a new spotter. Okay. However, at 70 points regular, so it went down by 5 points, assuming, of course, again, that you're buying spotter on this, you're looking at 17 to 70 points per pin, which is slightly better. Okay. Again, still not particularly great. However, there is something that should be noted here. Since a lot of the cheap high explosive damage stuff like light howitzers and medium mortars went down to D2 pins instead of being tied with the medium or with the heavy mortar at D3 pins, it now means if you're looking to do more than 1 pin per turn reliably when you hit something, the heavy mortar is one of the cheapest ways to do it. Okay. Like up there with recoilless guns. Okay. And so because of that, in third edition, if you're looking for pin generation that's not just going to be applying 1 pin to a unit, it's actually really good. Okay. Especially if you're going up against like veteran damage value 10 armor, because a lot of the stuff that can provide D3 pins relatively cheaply are going to be things like medium howitzers, which are either going to have to fire indirect just like a heavy mortar, but for more points, or they're going to have to firing at a side arc against the tank, which is not, in my experience, particularly easy to do. There are gimmicks with it. You can corner deploy on both of your corners, assuming that you get that option, and then kind of fire across at enemies that kind of are presenting flanks because they aren't running along the side of the board effectively. But in general, if you're looking for cheap ways to do more than 1 pin in a single activation, this is actually a really good way to do it. And when looking at damage potential, you obviously can't do any damage to a damage value 11 vehicle because the best you're going to have is pen +3, +1 for the top armor. Sometimes not even that if they're armored all around. Okay. And so the best you're going to be getting is damage value 10. And you'll notice that those first few sets are not particularly great. When you get to damage value 8, if you have a 4+ to hit chance, your chances of doing damage are actually pretty good, right? Because you're looking for then force to wound, and then from there, you know, glancing hits are not going to do damage as well because they're not going to destroy anything because you got to get the fire result. But in general, like your chances are not horrible at that point, right? And you're looking about a 1 in 12 chance, which sounds horrible. Just know that in the game of bolt action, it's actually not that bad. Okay. As you get down to damage value 7 and 6, it gets much more reliable regardless of what you're doing. Just by picking up the dice, you can be looking at as much as a 1 in 5 or 1 in 3 chance of just wiping the unit off the board just by picking it up and saying, I'm shooting at that unit, as long as you're getting that 5+ or 4+ to hit. You'll notice, by the way, I did not include 6+ to hits. That's because I think we all understand that a 6+ to hit is a lucky 6, and you should not be anticipating getting anything on a 6+ to hit. Okay, and by the way, the math confirms this. Okay, imagine all the numbers in the 5+ to hit category cut in half. That's your chances by picking up the dice and saying, I'm shooting at that unit, that you're going to do damage and actually remove a model from that unit. Okay. When you get to infantry, though, you'll notice it is very statically reliable. Okay, and that makes sense. Okay, because everything's going to be wounded on 2s. Of course, the numbers here are also almost exactly the same as we saw for the medium mortar. The difference is in that veteran category. Okay, that means hypothetically, if you're not going up against a lot of veterans, you're probably wasting things. Okay, but if you are going up against veterans, there is a very good reason to expect that it might be worthwhile to make that change from a damage total perspective. Okay, so when we talk about objective holding, what are we looking at? Well, we've got 4 men, hopefully in cover, because these guys should basically always be in cover. Do whatever you have to do to put cover on these units because they're very easy to remove if you don't have that. And they're probably being taken inexperienced or regular. You might see people taking them veteran. At veteran, they are very pricey, especially once you factor in the spotter. So I would be inclined not to take a unit that's like, around 90 points. I'd be inclined not to do that. Okay. But that being said, from a survivability perspective, it's decent. Okay. It'll do its job. Okay. It is not great at fighting mobile troops. So if you have troops that are advancing towards your objective, this is not the best tool for holding that objective. You're going to want to couple it with things like machine gun teams, auto cannons, things like that. They're going to be able to put pins down range, remove and whittle down enemy forces, possibly even destroy a transport, and then force people to foot slog their way over. All of that's good. Because, of course, with the heavy mortar, you are hoping for that lucky 6 in order to range in. And then you're hoping that you get to go again before they get to go. Right? So we have a second chance to try to destroy stuff that you didn't destroy before. You also don't have any additional weapons beyond the mortar. So this means you don't have pistols on all these guys, even if they're modeled with pistols. You don't have pistols that can fire at point blank range from people. You also, by the way, cannot assault with these. So if they come close to the objective, you can't just say, well, they're down to 2 men and I've got 4 men. So I'm going to rush them and try to assault them. Fixed teams in this game, in 3rd edition, are not allowed to declare an assault. So you got to take assaults or submachine guns at very point blank range, which is really bad too. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can't even fire the mortar at teams like that in situations like that because they're within your minimum range. You'll automatically miss, right? So just a lot of things to think about, okay, in terms of defense of it. And thus, unexpectedly, the drawbacks are pretty high. Okay, this is not the kind of unit you want to be parking solo on an objective. It is fixed. So if people wrap around it, they're going to have trouble trying to track with them and trying to remove them. They are relatively fragile. They can only fire indirect. They are quite expensive for being 4 men because, of course, you're paying for that very, very large mortar. And if you are investing in other things around them, like the spotters, for example, just realize that, all of that is extra assets that cost points. And the moment that this team is removed, those guys are going to be pulled off, right? So, just things to think about from an objective holding perspective. It's not horrible. Again, I say decent, but you want it to be part of a greater overall strategy. Now, where they really shine is in helping with objective taking, okay? Because you have a very long reach. Again, you pretty much don't have to worry about your maximum range. If you can see it on the table and you're not on the very far corners, there's a very good chance that you can just say, I'm firing at that unit, and you're not going to automatically miss because you were out of range. Out of arc, maybe, but not out of range, okay? You get the 3-inch HE template. That is a great way to force enemies to go down because they're going to want to have the hits. They don't want to suffer 5, 6, 7 wounding rolls looking for 2s okay, or something like that. If there's a transport or lighter vehicle that has the recce rule, this is the kind of thing where if you just want them to recce, so that way they have to maybe move away from an objective or get away from a point of interest where you want to be able to move your men up, clear a space. Honestly, just targeting with a heavy mortar might not be a bad idea because who wants to risk 10 +3 +4 against the top armor if it's not soft skinned, if it's an armored vehicle, um, and no cover, right? I mean, like that's a lot to think about. With all of this meaning that your attacking forces, as they begin moving up, it's going to be a safer go for them, right? Because more enemies are likely to be down, they're likely to be whittled down, they're likely to be pinned down, or things like that, unless they just let you have the ground you want, which is exactly how these mortars should be working. Okay. You get D3 pins, which is really nice. So on average, you should be getting more than one, right? This is unlike the D2 ones. I get into these arguments every now and then. I see them a little less nowadays, where people will say, well, I'm going to take a lighter medium mortar because they do 2 pins, and 2 pins is really good. And 2 pins is really good off of a single activation. But D2 does not equal 2. Okay. And a lot of people get this wrong. A lot of D2s equal 1. Okay. And with mortars, which have to range in and are not promised to get a second chance to try to hit on 2s, because maybe the enemy moves them around, or maybe they activate them before, the enemy, before you're able to activate the mortar again, or maybe they shoot out the spotter, or they wipe out the unit, or various things like that. Like there are a lot of situations where you're not guaranteed to get more than one on a unit. And the nice thing about this is, while you're still not guaranteed to get it because it is D3, you could roll a 1 or a 2 and only get one. On balance, you're going to get at least 2. And you could get as many as 3, which is fantastically good. Okay. The other nice thing too is that, well, obviously it's nice if, like, you could fire the mortar, you cause a bunch of the enemies to go down, and then you just roll right into town, so to speak, with your advancing troops that are trying to take the objective. The truth is, you don't strictly have to do that. Okay, it's not like the mortar has to land or arrive by that point. It could be that you time it that way when you're trying to hit on 5s, especially if you have more than one and they're all shooting at units around the same objective. The opponent might think, at least one of these is likely to hit. I'm going to choose to go down because I don't want to risk making a mistake, losing the critical unit, and then the enemy comes rolling in. And so they end up going down just to hold on to the unit, and then you can move up and then mow them down with some machine guns at point blank range, or whatever it is that you want to do. Flamethrowers, another fantastic way to deal with down larger squads and things like that. Like this is all good, but it doesn't even strictly have to hit. Okay, so play it by ear. Okay, get comfortable with it as to what you want to do. But in general, when it comes to objective taking, this is a fantastic supporting tool. You don't want them actually moving onto the objective. Although, if you bring them with troops that are moving onto the objective, you could then use them to move out of the transport or whatever, deploy into a position that's useful. And then as you guys are wrapping up the last of the guys around that objective, they start working on the next objective. And it kind of gives you a lightning strike, blitzkrieg, if you will, sort of approach. So in terms of target prioritization, what are we looking at? Honestly, same things we saw for medium mortars, right? Artillery are a really good choice because by wiping out a single one of them, you've probably made your points back, or at the very least, you've worked your way closer to that by a good margin. Infantry teams are also really good because you can pretty easily hit 2 to 3 men at once. If they don't go down, you might even wipe out the whole unit in a single go. Okay. Your camping infantry are also really good because while they can technically try to move beyond 3 inches in order to try to reset you while still maintaining the objective, one, that's actually harder to do than you think because terrain might intervene, cause it not to work. It could be that, yes, there is a space where you can move so that you're still within range of the objective while not being within range of where you were, but you might not get as much cover, and thus they might be able to wrap around with machine guns or autocannons. And if that's the case, if the heavy mortar just causes the unit to be more easily softened up and removed by those assets and tools, that might be worth more than hitting them with these. Okay. And so because that it's still doing its job, and thus this is an ideal mortar target, if nothing else than to bully around, if not to actually remove. Okay. And then camping vehicles, things like self-propelled howitzers, especially the open top kinds, that really would prefer not to be getting that move and shoot penalty. They want to be hitting on bores to help get their value back. Anti-aircraft vehicles, especially the ones that don't get to move and shoot because they have that stationary firing platform rule. Or tanks that would prefer to be using a 3+ to hit with an AT gun instead of a 5+ to hit with an advancing AT gun. All of that is fantastic, right? Transports that are waiting to move out because they're waiting for certain assets to get removed, or they're waiting for some of your units that are in ambush to be triggered by other units. That way they don't all hit the transport. All of these things are great targets for mortars. Okay. So herein lies the question: medium mortar, heavy mortar, with the obvious caveat that some nations don't get access to heavy mortars, so they're obviously choosing medium mortars because in my mind, the medium mortar is still better than the light mortar. More on that in light mortars video. If you disagree with it, perfectly fine. Play with the things that you think are fun. Okay, totally fine. I just don't personally tend to like them, so there's that. But when it comes to the medium and heavy mortars, there are some ways you can go wrong with a heavy mortar. And the first of which is if you're hitting inexperienced or regular infantry teams or artillery, you can technically use a heavy mortar and you might clip more models when you hit them, but your rolling to wound is going to be the same, but you're paying close to 25% more points for it, which is maybe not as good in my book. Okay, I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying you are paying a good amount more points for the exact same effect, effectively. Okay, especially if the opponent has situated their guys that a 2-inch diameter template will catch just as many models because of the low number of models in each of those teams as a 3-inch template. Okay. When looking at veteran teams, I do think heavy mortar is better. One, because veteran teams tend to be run closer to 6 to 8 people, so you are more likely to overlap more bodies if you end up running a heavy mortar. You're winning on 2s instead of 3s, which is more reliable. You're doing D3 pins instead of D2 pins, which means you're more likely to stack at least 2 pins on them, which means the chances that they fail an order test are actually higher. And if you are able to then pile in with a couple more, you might be able to force a rally. Whereas if you're only doing the 1 pin, they might be able to shed that relatively easily, even if it's just have a chaplain nearby and then use the chaplain before that unit goes to help remove a pin and then get them up and running. Okay. Infantry squads. Honestly, for most infantry squads, it actually doesn't matter between the two, especially true for inexperienced and regular infantry. To some extent, even veteran infantry, to some extent, like you can use them in. Again, I do feel like the heavy mortar is probably better. I feel like the medium mortar is still going to do fine from a removal standpoint. It's fine. It's not as good. You can technically use either. Okay, and I say this mostly as an encouragement to those minor nations that find that, oh gosh darn it, we got wiped out in the war so quickly we didn't get access to these, right, or something like that. Don't fret. Medium mortar still works fine. It may not be quite as good, but it does still work fine. Okay. With the soft skin vehicles, honestly, medium mortars are perfectly okay. Yes, there's technically a difference between a 4+ to wound and a 3+ to wound. Because of how little soft skin vehicles tend to cost, I think it is extremely marginal, that extra 16%. Okay. Whatever it is to hit, followed by 4s to destroy, in my experience, is perfectly acceptable. Okay, that's a perfectly acceptable amount. And doing D2 pins to whatever may be in a soft skin vehicle instead of D3, well, that could be nice. Like again, 6 of one, if doesn't of another, right? I mean, especially for how much you're saving on the medium mortar, it might actually just be better to do a medium mortar. That being said, for armored vehicles of any kind, medium mortars are okay if you can land the hits. It is way more reliable, though, especially to destroy them if you're looking at heavy mortars. And if you're looking at veteran damage value 10 vehicles that are trying to avoid being hit and pinned by stuff, medium mortar is going to do literally nothing against those. Whereas the heavy mortar is at least doing pins, if not actually doing glancing damage. And so in general, I mean, I'd recommend if you haven't played with mortars, you should at least try them. Figure out whether you're comfortable with the Russian roulette style approach to attacking, which is indirect fire, right? Sometimes it comes in really easily, sometimes it doesn't. I was recently at a tournament where in a single game, my opponent with 2 medium mortars successfully ranged in on 6s 3 times in the entire game. And the math on that was not particularly good. Okay, like that it was going to happen, but it did happen. Okay, and I do think that's an outlier, but it does happen. And so it is helpful to remind yourself that yeah, you're going to have some games where they're going to miss every single time. Remember that part of what you're doing is you're causing opponents to go down, you're causing them to move around, you're causing the opponent to play the game differently. That also factors into value. It's not just how many points they move. Okay. Second, and more than that, if they do end up coming in, even on an average level, you're going to remove a decent number of models, which is going to be a decent amount of value to make back their cost. And if you do end up going on the high side, like my opponent did in round 3 of a tournament, well, then, I mean, that's just gravy, right? On top of the benefits you were already getting. Okay. So my recommendation is go ahead and give it a try. Take some mortars. Mortars are really good. And I do think that they're worth looking at, especially in the larger calibers. Okay. Now, soon we're going to be talking about the heavy weapons platoon. There's a couple of other things that I wanted to address first because we're going to be talking about in heavy weapons platoon from a special rules perspective. Suffice to say, we're going to be doing it pretty soon. But keep in mind the different types of tools that you have here, because a lot of the weaknesses that we've talked about with mortars can be overcome with things like machine gun teams, anti-tank teams, and even transports, right? In some respects. And so because of that, keep in mind that yes, like while these do have problems, they are firmly in the good camp for me. They're one of the most good unit profiles that we have in the game right now, not because they always hit or they always do damage or they always make the points back, but because of how they've caused the enemy to change how they play the game. And that is something that is very valuable. But what do you think? Do you think that mortars are just, magnets for machine guns waiting to happen? Do you think that heavy mortars are paying too much for situational benefits that not every army even gets in the case of the Netherlands, for example, which doesn't get any veteran troops whatsoever, or sometimes are extremely rare to see because of the groups you play against? Maybe you still play against a large number of inexperienced Japanese troops or inexperienced and regular partisan units or something else like that. Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.